For thousands of years, people have worshipped and feared all sorts of different kinds of gods. Gradually, though, we have been able to dismiss the existence of some of these gods through research and technological progress. For example, we know now that water is just 2 atoms of hydrogen and an atom of oxygen per molecule. It's not smart. So the rising and falling tides are not some ocean goddess doing a dance for us. We know now that they're just caused by the moon's orbit around the Earth. We know now that earthquakes are the result of shifting tectonic plates within the Earth, not some pissed-off sky god who's shaking the planet. We also know that volcanic eruptions are caused by built-up pressure of molten magma from under the Earth's crust, and the oozing fire-like substance that comes out of volcanoes comes from that magma. So it's not some god trying to communicate with us. This is how we know the God Yahweh of the Bible is not real. See, the character Yahweh is just a volcano god. A lot of people don't realize that because they haven't read the necessary books in the Bible, and often when people do read those books, they aren't looking for the damning evidence that shows this to be the case. Even skeptics commonly refer to Yahweh as a sky god, sky daddy, or invisible man in the sky. Sure, the character is in the sky sometimes, like when he's in the form of smoke, and his mountain reaches into the sky. But let's look at some Bible verses. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 1, Mount Sinai is referred to as the mountain of God. And in verse 5, Moses is commanded to remove his shoes while standing on this holy mountain ground. So finally, in chapter 15, verse 17, it is established that the reason Sinai is called the mountain of God is because it is the place of his dwelling, which he built with his own hands. In other words, Yahweh lived in Mount Sinai. That's right, Yahweh is just a magic man that lives in a mountain, who apparently has a short temper, as we see early on in Leviticus chapter 10, when he lays waste to 2 individuals for failing to appropriately follow his instructions on how to build a fire. It's no wonder that he was seen as such a quick-to-anger god, when you realize that combined with Mount Sinai, Yahweh is a volcano god. And, as we find in Exodus 19:18, when they arrive at the mountain, it is smoking and shaking, and God appears on this mountain in the form of fire descending upon it. Of course, Mount Sinai is not an active volcano, and probably never was. There is evidence of ancient lava flows in the area, but nothing that necessarily concretely links it to Mount Sinai. That's alright though, since this story of an intercessor climbing a mountain and receiving laws from God is an old one that has been handed down anyway. Around 1700 BC, Babylonian King Hammurabi wrote some laws quite similar to the ones given to Moses by Yahweh. They included concepts like eye for an eye, and regulations regarding obligations, professions, and rights including commerce, slavery, marriage, theft, and debts. One need only read the book of Exodus to see the parallels to the Mosaic laws. And according to legend, King Hammurabi climbed a mountain to receive these laws from the sun god. Stories like these were passed along by word of mouth before they ever made it onto papyrus. So, through oral tradition, it was inevitable that these stories would gradually become slightly distorted. And of course, any priests or editors who were writing these stories down probably added some of their own thoughts or opinions. Hence all the orders for priests to be allowed large portions of offerings brought to the Lord. You know, gifts, peace offerings, sin offerings, guilt offerings, or the good old burnt offerings that bring a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And of course, translators have fairly often likely altered the text to comply with their moral standards. Egyptologist Mustafa Gadala seems to think the Moses character may have some of his roots in the Egyptian sun cult pharaoh Akhenaten. Akhenaten reigned during the 18th dynasty of Egypt around 1400 BC, the time which Moses supposedly was handed laws from God atop Mount Sinai. Gadala says that as a baby, Akhenaten reportedly was sent down a river and rescued, and when he grew up, started a monotheistic religion in a time when polytheism was favored, as reported with Moses. Also like Moses, Akhenaten moved against any worship of the other gods and attempted to erase them from history. So if Moses is at least partially based off of historical individuals, King Hammurabi and Akhenaten could be a couple of those individuals. because aside from these models inflicted with revision, there are no historical documents outside the Bible or the Quran lending evidence that Moses was a real person. And, as it turns out, there doesn't seem to be any evidence to support the idea that the mountain presently known as Mount Sinai is the same Mount Sinai that appears in the Bible. In fact, the present Mount Sinai was called such later. It was named after the mountain in the Bible. But which volcano is the story about Mount Sinai based off of? Well, there are several options. Saudi Arabia contains multiple volcanoes that could have been adequate candidates. Professor Colin Humphreys of Cambridge University thinks it may be a mountain in northwestern Saudi Arabia called Mount Bader. We must keep in mind that Moses' father-in-law was the priest of Midian, which is in Saudi Arabia. When Moses had his burning bush experience at the mountain of God, there seemed to be some implication that he was in Midian. Moses spent 40 years there, and it just so happens the Midianites reportedly worshipped a volcano god called Yahweh.
So you have that problem with human beings. Anything that occurs beyond their comprehension, they have to invent an excuse for. They have to create gods and demons to account for things, because people come to the leadership of that community. No matter how primitive the tribe, they say, how come bad wind blow people off island? I said, you not behave good. You not make not enough contribution to volcano. Throw your brother-in-law into volcano. Maybe it doesn't erupt then. So if you throw your brother-in-law into the volcano and it still erupts, you have to throw your sister-in-law in. So you get metaphysics. You get religion. You get superstition. Knock wood. Or you wear a rabbit's foot. Just remember that the rabbit had 4 of them. Didn't do him any good.